A bizarre case where police still can't completely figure out what they found when they executed a search warrant on an abandoned home.
Yeah, so inside authorities say they found a 55-gallon drum, chemicals, fake law enforcement IDs, lots of ammunition, and women reported missing may even be connected to this property. Newsmax.
This story starts with a man who kept a client list. His name was Ehsan Alavi. He was 49 years old. He had been operating as a senior document broker inside an international asylum and residency fraud network for the past 13 years. He worked out of a small commercial office in West Los Angeles that, on the outside, looked like a legitimate immigration consultancy. On the inside, it was one of the largest paid pipelines in the United States for fabricated asylum claims, manufactured persecution narratives, forged supporting documentation, and, for the clients who could afford the highest tier of service, pre-arranged favorable rulings from a specific federal immigration court judge. Ehsan's clients were not desperate people fleeing persecution. His clients were wealthy foreign nationals who could pay between $180,000 and $900,000 for a manufactured legal status in the United States. Some were sanctioned businessmen from countries under U.S. financial restrictions. Some were foreign political figures who wanted a second passport pipeline for their families. Some were the adult children of foreign organized crime figures whose parents were preparing safe harbor routes. All of them wanted the same thing: real, legally issued U.S. asylum or permanent residency status, produced through the American immigration court system, with paperwork that would survive federal scrutiny for the rest of their lives. Ehsan had been giving it to them for 13 years. In the early autumn of the previous year, he began to understand that the network he had been operating inside was preparing to move on without him. His longtime client list had grown large enough to be dangerous. His institutional knowledge had grown deep enough to be inconvenient. 2 colleagues at his tier of the operation had, in the previous 6 months, been quietly moved off active client rotation and had not been given new assignments. He knew exactly what that meant. In mid-November, Ehsan walked into the FBI's Los Angeles field office on a Tuesday afternoon. He gave his name. He gave his employer. He gave the names of 11 senior figures inside the network. He gave the addresses of 3 document production facilities, 2 overseas coordination offices, and 1 senior American legal figure whose favorable rulings on high-value cases had been the crown jewel of the network's premium service tier for the past 10 years. He named the chief judge of the Los Angeles Immigration Court. If you believe corruption like this should be brought into the light, hit like, subscribe to the channel, and comment exposed below. The federal investigation that followed took 13 months. It had to move with extraordinary care. The target was a senior federal immigration court judge, a chief judge of one of the largest immigration courts in the United States, appointed to the bench 19 years earlier and promoted to chief judge 8 years ago. Every move federal investigators made had to be documented twice, verified twice, and structured in a way that would allow the case to survive years of appellate review from defense attorneys who would have access to the most sophisticated legal representation in the country. What investigators assembled over those 13 months was the structural picture of an operation that had been running for the entire duration of the chief judge's tenure in that role. The chief judge was a man named Alan Reston, 66 years old, chief judge of the Los Angeles Immigration Court, former deputy chief counsel for the Executive Office for Immigration Review before that, former immigration attorney in private practice before that, the kind of judicial figure whose public resume had made him, by every conventional measure, one of the most respected senior immigration jurists in the Western United States. For 10 of his 8 years as chief judge, the operation had actually begun before his promotion. During his final 2 years as an associate judge, his chambers had been operating a parallel case assignment and adjudication structure that ran beneath the formal apparatus of the court. Here is how the operation actually worked. The immigration court's case assignment system had been designed, on paper, to distribute cases across the court's judges through a randomized algorithmic process intended to prevent forum shopping and judicial favoritism. The system produced weekly assignment lists that were formally reviewed and approved by the chief judge's chambers. Reston had built a small, invisible override into the review process. Certain cases, specifically cases involving high-value asylum applicants whose supporting documentation had been prepared through Ehsan Alavi's document broker network, were quietly reassigned during the chief judge's weekly review before the assignment lists were finalized and distributed. The reassignments moved those specific cases onto Reston's own personal docket, or onto the dockets of 2 associate judges who had been operationally cooperating with him for the past 8 years. Once the high-value cases were on the cooperating dockets, the outcomes were predetermined. The supporting documentation prepared by Alavi's network was engineered to meet the technical evidentiary standards of a favorable asylum or residency ruling. The judges, Reston and his 2 cooperating associates, accepted the documentation, ruled in favor of the applicants, and produced legally valid, legally reviewed federal immigration court decisions that granted permanent U.S. legal status. Across the 10-year window of the operation, the cooperating dockets had processed approximately 4,200 favorable rulings on cases that had come through Alavi's network. The average payment received by the network for a premium tier favorable ruling was approximately $380,000. Approximately 40% of the network's per-case revenue had flowed back to Reston and to his 2 cooperating associates through a layered structure of shell companies, offshore consulting arrangements, and physical cash transfers. Combined operational value of the network across the 10-year window came out to approximately $1.6 billion in gross client payments. Approximately $640 million of that value had flowed to the judicial protection layer inside the court. The remaining $960 million had funded the document broker network itself, the international coordination offices, the document production facilities, the payment consolidation structures, and the operational security infrastructure that had allowed the network to run for 13 years without triggering a single federal counterintelligence investigation. The man who had architected the judicial protection layer was a longtime private consultant to Reston named Delmar Vrance, 63 years old, former senior counsel at the U.S. Department of Justice's Executive Office for Immigration Review. Before that, 13 years as a senior policy advisor at the Department of Homeland Security on immigration court oversight protocols. Before that, 10 years as a federal prosecutor with primary responsibilities in immigration and document fraud cases. Delmar Vrance had spent 28 years on the federal side of the immigration adjudication oversight system. He had personally written internal EOIR guidance on the detection of judicial favoritism patterns. He had testified before congressional committees on the structural indicators federal investigators looked for in immigration court corruption cases. He had once helped draft the case assignment protocols that the Los Angeles Immigration Court was still operating under. He had retired from federal service 9 years earlier. Within 6 months of his retirement, Alan Reston, then still an associate judge, in the operational planning phase of what would become the premium tier operation, had quietly retained him as a private strategic advisor through a corporate cover called Coastal Judicial Strategies LLC, operating out of a commercial office in a suburban Los Angeles business district. Inside the encrypted communications archive that investigators eventually recovered from Vrance's operational server, his code name was The Advocate. A message in the archive, written 5 years into the operation, read, "Federal Immigration Court oversight is built around case pattern review at the individual judge level. If a judge produces statistically anomalous outcomes on a specific category of case, the review system will detect it. Our work is to ensure that the outcomes never look statistically anomalous. The reassignments are small. The cooperating dockets are distributed. The pattern is never large enough to appear on any oversight metric that has ever been designed to monitor for exactly this kind of corruption." Alan Reston sat in the chair. Delmar Vrance had built the system that allowed 10 years of judicial protection to remain invisible to every federal oversight protocol that had ever been designed to catch it. Until Ehsan Alavi walked into the FBI's Los Angeles field office on a Tuesday afternoon and gave them the name that had been at the top of the network's premium service tier for the past 10 years. The raid happened on a Thursday morning at the chief judge's private residence in the hills above Beverly Hills. At 5:42 a.m. on a Thursday in late January, a federal judge in the Central District of California signed simultaneous search and arrest warrants for 17 locations across the Los Angeles metropolitan region. At 6:14 a.m., the order went out. Execute. Location 1. Alan Reston's residence, above Beverly Hills. A 9,600 square foot property on a hillside lot with a view of the Los Angeles basin. FBI and ICE tactical teams approached through the main gate and through a secondary tactical entry point along the eastern property line. The residence's private security personnel were secured without incident. Federal agents entered the main residence at 6:32 a.m. Alan Reston was inside the residence. He was awake, in his study. He did not resist. He asked twice whether the warrants had been reviewed by a senior federal judge. The agents confirmed that they had. Inside the residence, agents recovered 4 burner phones, 2 home office laptops with active encrypted messaging sessions, a wall safe containing approximately $1.4 million in cash and gold bars, and a hidden floor compartment beneath a private library floorboard containing a leather-bound coordination ledger documenting every reassigned case across the 10-year window, along with offshore banking documentation tied to accounts in the Cayman Islands, Singapore, and Switzerland. Location 2, Coastal Judicial Strategies Office, suburban Los Angeles. Delmar Vrance was inside the office at the time of the raid. A document shredder was operating. Inside a back office, behind a built-in cabinet, agents found a black rack-mounted server, running, active, and transmitting. Cyber analysts began extraction immediately. Vrance did not resist arrest. Location 3, Delmar Vrance's residence, Pasadena. Vrance was already in custody at his office. Inside the residence, agents found a home office server concealed inside a built-in cabinet in a private library, backup drives spanning the full 9 years of his post-retirement operational record, a wall safe containing approximately $960,000 in cash, and a hidden floor compartment containing 5 foreign passports, 4 in different names. Location 4, Los Angeles Immigration Court Chambers. A secondary FBI team executed a federal warrant on Reston's chambers at the courthouse. Court personnel cooperated immediately once the federal warrants were presented. Agents executed a full federal seizure of the chamber's electronic case management records, internal communications, and the case assignment logs governing the previous 10 years of court operations. 2 associate immigration judges identified through the encrypted communications archive as the cooperating dockets were quietly detained at their own residences within the same operational window. Location 5, Ehsan Alavi's former consultancy office, West Los Angeles. The document broker network's Los Angeles operational hub. 6 senior members of the network, the individuals Alavi had identified in his cooperation, were detained at the location. Agents executed a full federal seizure of the office's electronic records, physical client files, document production equipment, and the financial systems used to manage the network's offshore consolidation accounts. Location 6, International Coordination Office, Los Angeles Downtown Financial District, the network's overseas liaison office. Agents recovered detailed operational records documenting client relationships with foreign nationals across 17 countries, including sanctions-flagged jurisdictions where several of the network's premium-tier clients had originated. Location 7, Document Production Facility, Commerce, California. The network's primary domestic document fabrication operation. Agents recovered specialized printing equipment, forged government seals from 12 foreign nations, manufactured supporting documentation for approximately 900 in-process client cases, and operational records linking the facility to the network's international coordination infrastructure. Locations 8 through 17, 10 additional locations including the registered offices of 6 shell companies tied to the operations laundering chain, the private residences of 3 corporate intermediaries who had managed the offshore consolidation accounts, and the office of a private immigration law firm that had been operating as the front-facing legal representation channel for the network's premium-tier clients. By 11:42 a.m. that Thursday morning, 38 individuals were in federal custody. Alan Reston, Delmar Vrance, 2 associate immigration judges, 8 senior members of the document broker network, 6 senior staff members across the shell company laundering network, 4 corporate intermediaries who had managed the offshore consolidation accounts, DHS asylum outcome monitoring, State Bar Association referrals, journalistic profiles of the Los Angeles Immigration Court's caseload, and the careful structural design of a former senior EOIR counsel who had spent 28 years building the very federal oversight framework he was now quietly running operations against. It did not survive a document broker who wrote down the name at the top of the premium service tier on a piece of paper and handed it to a federal agent on a Tuesday afternoon in Los Angeles. If a judicial corruption network this large could operate for 10 years inside one of the largest federal immigration courts in the United States, producing 4,200 legally issued federal immigration rulings on manufactured asylum cases while every formal oversight mechanism functioned as designed, how many other document brokers are sitting tonight at how many other consultancy offices across the country, watching their client lists grow just large enough to become dangerous and deciding whether their next visit is going to be to a federal field office or to a graveyard?